My father decided to marry a young woman a month after my mom's death and threatened to kick me out of the inheritance if I didn't attend the wedding. Little did he know what was coming to him. I, 28F, lost my mom to cancer a week ago. The pain is still raw, like an open wound that won't stop bleeding. But what's made this unbearable time even worse is how my dad, 54M, has been acting. To understand the full picture, I need to give some background on my family. My parents' relationship was always rocky, to put it mildly. When they first got together in their early 20s, my dad took my mom to meet his parents. It didn't go well. His family was wealthy and status-conscious, while my mom came from a humble background. They rejected her outright, accusing her of being a gold digger who was only after my dad's money. My dad was furious. In a rare show of backbone, he stood up for my mom and cut ties with his family. They moved to a different state to start fresh. From that day forward, he never talked about his family again. He prohibited my mom from trying to contact them or even mentioning them. As a result, I grew up knowing nothing about that entire side of my family tree. The only family I knew growing up was my mom's grandfather. He had raised her since she was orphaned as a young child. He was a kind, gentle man who doted on me. But he passed away a few years ago, leaving my mom as my only real family connection. My childhood memories are dominated by the sound of shouting. My parents fought constantly, their arguments echoing through our house at all hours. My dad would yell horrible things at my mom, calling her stupid, worthless, ugly. He'd accuse her of trapping him, of ruining his life. Sometimes the fights would turn physical. I'd hear crashes and thuds, then my mom's sobs. I spent many nights huddled in my room, pillow over my ears, trying to block it all out. In the mornings, I'd creep out to find things broken. My mom with puffy eyes and sometimes bruises she'd try to hide with makeup. My dad would act like nothing happened, reading the paper and ignoring us both. It was clear from early on that my dad hated being a father. He'd complain loudly about how I'd ruined their lives, how he never wanted kids. Most of the time, he just ignored my existence entirely. The only times he acknowledged me were to criticize. My grades weren't good enough, I was too loud, too messy, too needy. Nothing I did was ever right in his eyes. My mom did her best to shield me from the worst of his abuse and give me some impression of a normal childhood. She was my rock, always there with a hug and words of encouragement when my dad tore me down. She'd take me to the park or for ice cream after bad fights, trying to create happy memories to balance out the dark ones. I guess my parents must have started out in love, but it faded quickly. By the time I was in elementary school, they were sleeping in separate rooms and barely speaking except to argue. I often wondered why my mom stayed. Years later, she confided that she stayed for my sake. She was afraid of what would happen to me if she left me alone with him. But I could see how miserable she was, trapped in a loveless marriage with a cruel man. As I got older, the dynamic shifted. My dad's abuse became more focused on me as I entered my teens. He'd belittle my appearance, mock my interests, crush any dreams or ambitions I expressed. My mom would try to stand up for me, which only made him turn his anger back on her. It was a brutal cycle that seemed never ending. I left for college as soon as I could, eager to escape the toxic environment of my childhood home. But I worried constantly about my mom, left alone with him. I'd call her often, and sometimes I could hear the tremor of held-back tears in her voice. When Mom was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago, I hoped it might finally soften my dad's heart. Instead, he became even more cruel if that was possible. He complained endlessly about the medical bills, about how inconvenient her illness was for him. He refused to take her to chemo appointments or help care for her in any way. I couldn't bear the thought of Mom going through this alone, so I moved back home to take care of her in her final months. My dad was rarely there, always working late or going out with friends. When he was home, he'd snap at Mom for being too slow or making a mess. He showed no compassion or tenderness, even as she withered away before our eyes. It broke my heart to see her suffer not just from the cancer, but from his coldness too. There were nights I'd sit by her bed, holding her hand as she cried, wondering how the man she married could be so heartless. I tried to fill the void, to give her all the love and care he wouldn't. But I knew it wasn't the same. When my mom passed away, the loss was indescribable. She was my best friend, my support system, the only person who truly loved me unconditionally. I feel like a part of me died with her. My dad, on the other hand, seemed almost relieved. He barely shed a tear at the funeral and spent most of the time on his phone. He rushed through the arrangements, opting for the cheapest options. It was like he couldn't wait to be done with the whole thing and move on with his life. Yesterday, just a month after Mom died, my world was shaken again. My dad brought home a young woman and introduced her as his girlfriend, Megan, 27F. He said they'd been dating for a year, which means he was seeing her while my mom was dying of cancer. I was shocked and furious. How could he betray Mom like that in her final months? Megan tried to hug me, saying she was so sorry for my loss, but her sickeningly sweet tone felt fake. There was a calculating look in her eyes that made me uneasy. She's barely older than me. How could she be interested in my dad for anything other than his money? Then my dad dropped another bombshell. He announced that he and Megan were getting married soon. He said I needed to accept her as my new stepmom, or he'd cut me out of his will. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom's body is barely cold and he's already replacing her. I told my dad I refused to play happy family with his mistress. He got angry, calling me selfish and immature. He said I was being unreasonable and that I should be happy he found love again. Megan started crying, saying she just wanted us all to get along. But it felt manipulative to me, like she was trying to make me look like the bad guy. I'm at a loss for what to do now. Part of me wants to tell my dad to shove his inheritance and cut contact with him for good. After a lifetime of his abuse and neglect, followed by this final betrayal of my mom's memory, I don't want anything to do with him. But I'm afraid of being left with nothing. Mom left me some money, but not enough to live on long term. And the house I grew up in is in my dad's name. Without my inheritance, I'd be struggling financially. Is it worth swallowing my pride and principles to secure my future? Megan keeps texting me, saying she wants to take me shopping and bond as mother and daughter. It makes my skin crawl. She's only a year younger than me. The idea of her being my stepmom is laughable. I get the strong feeling she's just after my dad's money and sees me as competition for the inheritance. I feel so alone without my mom. She was the only one who ever truly loved and supported me. Now I'm stuck living in this house with the father who never wanted me and his gold digger girlfriend. Every time I see them together, laughing and cuddling on the couch where mom used to sit, I want to scream. How can my dad act like mom never existed? The house feels different now, spoiled by their presence. Megan has already started moving her things in, replacing mom's belongings. She rearranged the living room furniture and bought new curtains. It's like she's trying to erase all traces of mom. I hide in my room most of the time, unable to bear watching this woman take my mother's place. My dad is acting like a lovesick teenager. He's always fawning over Megan, buying her gifts, taking her on fancy dates. It's a side of him I've never seen before. He never treated my mom with a fraction of this affection. It hurts to see him being the loving partner to this stranger that he never was to my mother. I've tried talking to friends about the situation, but they don't really understand. They say things like, "At least your dad is happy," or "Maybe this Megan woman won't be so bad." They don't get how it feels to watch your father replace your mother so quickly and heartlessly. Part of me wonders if I'm overreacting. Maybe I should give Megan a chance for the sake of peace. My dad says I'm being bratty and need to grow up. He claims that mom would have wanted him to move on and be happy. But I can't shake the feeling that this is all wrong. How can I accept this woman as family when mom's only been gone a month? I've been having trouble sleeping, plagued by nightmares where I see my mom crying, watching my dad with Megan. I wake up in cold sweats, feeling guilty like I've failed her somehow by not fighting harder against the situation. The stress is taking a toll on my health. I've lost weight and my hair is starting to fall out. I've thought about reaching out to my dad's estranged family. Maybe they could help me understand him better or offer some support. But I have no idea how to contact them or if they'd even want to hear from me after all these years. And my dad would be furious if he found out I tried. I feel trapped and conflicted. On one hand, I want to honor my mom's memory and stand up against what feels like a huge disrespect to her. I want to tell my dad and Megan exactly what I think of their relationship and refuse to be any part of it. On the other hand, I'm afraid of losing my only remaining family and financial security. As awful as my dad has been, he's still my father. And without my inheritance, I'd be struggling to make ends meet. Is it worth compromising my principles for financial stability? I don't know what the right thing to do is. Should I just fake it to keep my inheritance? Or stick to my principles and risk losing everything? I feel so lost and conflicted. The wound of losing my mom is still so fresh, and this situation is like salt being rubbed into it. Any advice or perspective would be appreciated. I'm desperate for some guidance on how to navigate this painful and complex situation. Update. As my dad's wedding to Megan approached, I grew increasingly desperate to find a way to stop it. I couldn't bear the thought of this woman who was barely older than me becoming my stepmom, especially so soon after losing my own mother. One evening, luck seemed to be on my side. My dad left his laptop open when he rushed out with Megan for some last-minute wedding shopping. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't resist the opportunity to snoop and hopefully find something to derail their plans. At first, I didn't find anything unusual, but then I noticed he had a second Facebook account. Curious, I clicked on it and was shocked by what I discovered. It was like looking at a stranger's profile. The photos showed my dad living a completely different life, one where my mom and I didn't exist. According to this account, my dad had never married. He claimed to be living in our state just for work. There were pictures of him with his parents and siblings at various events over the years. Events I knew had happened during my childhood, when he was supposedly estranged from his family. The more I dug, the more I uncovered. My dad had been maintaining two separate identities all this time. He even had another house in the city where he hosted his parents when they visited. All those business trips over the years suddenly made sense. He was living his other life. I felt sick to my stomach. My whole life had been a lie. My dad's family hadn't rejected my mom. They never even knew about her. Or me. We were my dad's dirty little secret that he'd been hiding for almost 30 years. I was shaking with anger and hurt, but I knew I had to act fast before my dad returned. I took pictures of everything I could find, the other profile, photos of the other house, anything that proved his deception. Then I found my grandfather's email address and sent him a message explaining who I was, along with pictures of me, my mom, and my dad's current life with Megan. For 2 agonizing weeks, I heard nothing back. I was starting to think my grandfather had dismissed my email as some kind of scam. But then one day, out of the blue, I got a phone call. It was my grandfather. He wanted to meet me in person. We arranged to meet at a cafe in town. I was a bundle of nerves as I waited for him. When an older man who looked strikingly like my dad walked in, I knew it was him. He approached me cautiously, studying my face. I could see the moment he recognized my dad's features in me. My grandfather sat down and told me he hadn't said anything to my dad about my email or this meeting. He wanted to hear the whole story from me first. So I told him everything. About my mom, my childhood, my dad's abuse, and now the situation with Megan. I could see the anger building in his eyes as I spoke. When I finished, my grandfather was quiet for a long moment. He admitted he was shocked and disappointed to learn about me and my mom. But given the circumstances, he wanted to help me. He said he would confront my dad and get to the bottom of this. A few days later, my grandfather called my dad for a meeting. I wasn't there, but my grandfather filled me in afterward. He told my dad that he knew about his secret family, me and my mom. My dad was completely blindsided. He had no defense prepared for this scenario. It came out that my dad had lied to his family all these years because he was afraid of losing his inheritance. His parents were wealthy and conservative. He thought if they knew he'd gotten a girl pregnant and married her against their wishes, they would cut him off. So he created this elaborate double life to keep his inheritance secure while still marrying my mom. My grandfather was furious. Not only had my dad lied for decades, but he'd deprived me of knowing my family. And now he was trying to marry this young woman just weeks after my mom died. My grandfather decided to do some digging into Megan's background. What he found confirmed my suspicions. Megan had a history of dating wealthy older men and then taking them for all they were worth in messy divorces. She had several lawsuits against her from ex-boyfriends claiming she'd stolen from them. It was clear she was just after my dad's money. My grandfather confronted my dad with this information too. My dad tried to defend Megan, but it was obvious he was just scrambling to salvage his plans. His carefully constructed house of lies was crumbling around him. In the end, my grandfather made a decision that changed everything. He told my dad that because of his years of deception and his heartless treatment of me and my mom, he was cutting my dad out of his will. Instead, he was going to leave my dad's share of the inheritance directly to me. I was stunned. I'd gone from being afraid of losing my inheritance to suddenly being promised far more than I'd ever expected. But more than the money, I was overwhelmed by my grandfather's acceptance. After a lifetime of rejection from my dad, here was a family member choosing to embrace me. My dad was livid when he found out. He stormed into my room, red-faced and yelling. He accused me of turning his family against him and ruining his life. But for the first time, I wasn't scared of him. I stood my ground and told him that he'd ruined his own life with his lies and cruelty. Megan broke off the engagement when she realized my dad was being cut off financially. She moved out of the house the very next day, not even bothering to say goodbye. My dad was left with nothing. No fiancé, no inheritance, and no more lies to hide behind. As for me, I'm still processing everything that's happened. My grandfather has been making an effort to get to know me. He's introduced me to my aunts, uncles, and cousins. It's strange and a bit overwhelming to suddenly have this big family, after a lifetime of it just being me and my mom. I'm planning to move out of my dad's house soon. My grandfather offered to help me find an apartment. I'm looking forward to starting fresh, away from the painful memories in that house. I still miss my mom terribly. I wish she could have lived to see the truth come out and to meet her in-laws, but I like to think she'd be happy knowing that I'm finally free of my dad's abuse and that I found a family who wants me. It's going to take time to heal from everything that's happened. I'm looking into therapy to help me process my childhood trauma and these recent revelations. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. I know some people might judge me for exposing my dad's lies. But after a lifetime of his abuse and neglect, I don't feel guilty. He made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. I'm choosing to focus on building relationships with my new family and creating a better life for myself. Thank you to everyone who offered support and advice on my original post. Your kindness helped give me the strength to stand up for myself and uncover the truth. I'm grateful for this community and the help you've given me during this difficult time.